Well, good morning. Today is September the 6th, 2017, and this is really a kind of a nice fall day, so I thought I would take a little time out this morning and make a short video of one of my favorite project bikes that I've been working on quite literally since 1992. So that's a total of 25 years. Um, this bike is originally was, and still is, of course. It is a 1980 Suzuki DR400, and when this bike first came out, it was actually a pretty advanced motorcycle for its time, and at the same time, uh, for its class anyway, and at the same time, it was still using technology that was dated, by a half a decade or so. This one's been somewhat dramatically improved in the suspension department. The front forks and the front wheel are actually off of a Yamaha YZ motocrosser from the late 70s. And judging by the travel and the forks, I'm guessing probably it was like about a 78 or a 79 YZ something or other. It could have been a 125, it could have been a 250, it could have been a 400. I don't recall exactly where I sourced the forks. It was so long ago. And um, the front wheel is not substantially different from the stock Suzuki front wheel. It's drum disc brake, nothing fancy. It's just kind of the standard fare that was available back in that era. The forks, on the other hand, are a little bit bigger in diameter. The original forks were 36 millimeter. These are 38 millimeter, which required me to have a machine shop bore out the clamps that hold the forks, the triple trees or triple clamps, whatever you want to call them. And the inside of the forks were modified to accept fork, something called a cartridge emulator made by Racetech. So, and it's got different springs in it. So the front end's been reworked pretty thoroughly. The motor's a stock motor, with the exception of the original carburetor was replaced with a slightly larger 36 millimeter Mikuni round slide, and they're very tunable, and it's been set up for altitude. On the rear end, the rear shocks were sourced off of early 80s Husqvarna motocrosser or enduro. These are the same shocks that would have come on a variety of bikes that Husqvarna made. They give the rear end a little bit more travel because the shocks are longer and the stroke is longer. And I had Neil Hors of previously he was a Moose Racing mechanic. He was their suspension guy. Now he's got a company called Hitchcock Industries, which is basically just a one-man company, and he does virtually anything to suspensions you want. He can modify the suspensions and the damping and the valving and all that stuff. So he totally rebuilt those old ones. And even though they're a crusty old pair of shocks that were sourced off of an old bike, believe it or not, the way those shocks sit, there's about $1,000 in them. Just goes to show you how expensive it is to set up these old bikes. The forks setup wasn't inexpensive either. The rear wheel is pretty much stock Suzuki, and I don't recall, I know one of these rear wheels I have for some of these bikes have been relaced by Woodies, and that one, I'm guessing that one probably isn't one of the ones I had relaced, but I've got a rear wheel for it that's built for it that has been super smoked and relaced by Woody's Wheel Works and down in Denver, Inglewood, wherever he is. The exhaust system on it is the stock exhaust system, and it uses a kind of a can right sitting there right below the air filter box that is actually kind of the first muffler. The second muffler is been taken off the bike. So basically you can see where the exhaust would otherwise connect to it right above the shock reservoir. I took it off because I'm using it on my other bike. Whenever I need to, I just take it off the other bike and put it on this bike, and that gives the exhaust its U.S. Forest Service required spark arresting capability. It's actually because it does have a muffler right there, you know, below the airbox. It actually is not too obnoxious, but the second muffler quiets it down to the point that it's very, very presentable to the public. I'll just kind of walk around the bike a little bit. Front fender was sourced off of Yamaha XT250 somewhere, you know, it's basically in early 80s. The headlight number plate is stock Suzuki that came with it. Here's the right side of the bike. You can see the muffler can a little bit better. There's a little bit more of a close-up of those Olin shocks. The shocks are actually very sought after by people who set up vintage race bikes. You can still buy shocks like this, you know, the newer versions of them, and they're pretty pricey, so for me it was worth just having a used pair rebuilt. Anyway, stock gas tank, which is aluminum, which is nice because they don't rust. Handlebars to fit my, you know, orangutan type anatomy. I did put some handlebar risers on it. Otherwise, it's got pretty much stock Suzuki DR400 handlebars. I think they are. They might be something else, but they're Suzuki anyway. Rear end, that's not a stock fender. That's an aftermarket Acerbis Enduro fender, which I superimposed and basically mounted on top of the original fender, which was trimmed off. It was damaged, but I retained 2/3 of it just because it made a good mounting point. So anyway, it's a 25-year-long project. The motor runs good. It runs basically about the same as the stock XT500. It's certainly not any slower or faster. And in terms of trail bike use, far superior to the XT. Much better suspension, the way it's set up. And the bike stock actually was superior to a stock XT500 because of the suspension and general handling of the bike. Kind of comparing apples to oranges. So it's a neat bike. I'm going to stop here and we'll make one more video today of an XT500 that I've modified.